I'm Martin Preston. I'm head of R&D at Framestore. I'm sort of on the VFX side of Framestore because there's sort of two wings to the company. And usually there's the VFX wing that do film visual effects, and there's also a commercials wing. But I tend to spend most of my time concentrating on the film side of things. So I lead the team of R&D developers who do all the proprietary technology that we use in our movies. At Framestore, the R&D team are a fairly close part of production in that we're not part of the technology wing of the company, we report to the head producers. So I spend my time essentially either still doing some coding or doing management of the team, in other words making sure everything's on track, or else working with the shows and making sure the shows tell me what's coming up. I'm aware of any problems going on, what we need to focus our attention on to fight fires, and so on. So it's sort of it's a role that varies quite a lot. There are periods where I can retreat into my shell and write code, but the vast majority of the time I'm sort of maybe 20% writing code and the rest of the time management. It's a mixture of all of them, and like everyone in the film industry, from project to project, the balance shifts. I would say probably about half of my time is spent on half of my team's time is spent on the core technology, things that are shared across the shows and stuff it's not particularly glamorous necessarily, but it's stuff that's going to make sure we can deliver. And then the other chunk of time is basically spent making sure that any particular problems that come up on the show get addressed. So we don't do an awful lot of software for a particular show, but we do occasionally. So we'll have to send an R&D person onto a show to actually help solve a particular knotty problem they've got. Like at the moment, we're doing a lot of stuff with explosions and complicated fire simulations, and we've had our R&D guys actually work on the show to help the TDs in place. I think that the days of us being able to write everything ourselves have gone. So we sort of, if possible, we'll attempt to buy something. Because basically the point of R&D in a film company, I think, is to differentiate yourself from your competitors, either by being more efficient, so coming up with ways of doing things more quickly and therefore making more money out of it, or else to do something that we couldn't buy off the shelf. So we tend to spend our time either, if we could buy something off the shelf, great, but we tend to have to do things to optimize the workflow, which is typically you get called the pipeline, or things that you simply can't buy off the shelf, or customizing things that you can buy in order to sort of make it possible to do a particular show. There's a certain amount of efficiency, which is basically making sure you don't have to have thousands of people to do particular shows. But the more efficient you can make a process, the more time the artists have to concentrate on making the image look good, as opposed to just agonizing about making an image in the first place. So a lot of our optimization work, our efficiency focus, is on actually making the turnaround time for our processes that much cleaner and that much faster. So the artists are less bogged down in the detail of achieving the shot. They can sort of improve things. And Arnold's the perfect example of that, in that it's something that means the artist can concentrate on making the picture look good, as opposed to managing the data and the various bake passes and so on. Basically, right now, Arnold is our main renderer in VFX. We barely use anything else. It's surprised all of us how quickly we've shifted away from our other alternatives and we do everything in Arnold. From an R&D perspective, my time these days is spent either on efficiency of the shading. So our shader writers have become basically software engineers who spend their days optimizing things and agonizing over profiling tools. So there's an awful lot of work going into that just to speed things up. We also do, in any rendering technique, there's always bits of situations where the renderer will find it difficult to cope with. And so some of our R&D time is spent on developing technology which basically fills in the gaps of Arnold's abilities. So the perfect example of that being the bidirectional path tracing work that we've done recently, which we use on a couple of shows at the moment, which is to deal with a case that Arnold finds quite tricky to render. I think it basically, there's sort of 3 or 4 things that a renderer like Arnold gives you, and it's sort of hard to underestimate how much the simplicity of the interface to the lighters benefits things. The lighters' lives suddenly get so much easier that they have fewer things to remember how to fiddle with. They can sort of concentrate on making the image look nice. So the simplicity of it is one thing. The big thing, actually, the thing that really surprised us was the predictability of the renderer. That from a sort of a company perspective, we can start to anticipate how much rendering resource we're going to need on a show. We can, with some degree of accuracy. So in the past, it would often be a voyage of discovery where you'd find shots that were unusually expensive to render. And that's not so much the case. We still have expensive shots, but we know they're coming, so we can sort of anticipate around those things. And I think the single-mindedness of the algorithm that the renderer uses means we can predict more. And we couple that up with an awful lot of analytics, where we're gathering data from our render farm all the time, which enables to feed back into our estimation process. So I think the simplicity and the predictability of things are the big things for us. It's a bit difficult to sort of rate how much effect they would have had, and I don't think we really anticipated either of them. But when we set out on the project, we were going for some specific technology things we thought it was going to give us, like reduced memory. We weren't really expecting it to sort of, the predictability thing was a happy surprise. You come to a conference like FMX and everyone is interested in the pictures, everyone's interested in sort of the art that's behind it. From a company's perspective, really we spend more of our time worrying about how do we power the processors, how do we get enough cooling, where do we get the capacity for rendering from, and it's like, it's another capacity. In the same way we worry about staffing levels and making sure we have the right number of artists, we also spend a fair amount of our time worrying about the technology and just how much, are we going to need to ramp up, when will we need this rendering resource, how much power will we need.